Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We are continuing our journey through the music of the Mars Volta, and we've made it to this, their second album, 2005's Francis the Mute. So obviously this is, I guess, a high watermark moment for the Mars Volta. I think that this is their absolute magnum opus. This is their greatest accomplishment. I think there is certainly some consensus amongst Volta fans that this is where it's at. I think a lot of people will drift towards their first album, De Laus in the Comatorium, but I don't know. For me, it is all about Francis the Mute. This is absolutely epic. It is not only is it a high water mark for the Mars Volta, I think it's a high water mark for progressive rock. I said before, I tend to hold the Mars Volta in a slightly higher regard than some of the other prog bands that have come, in the later decades, more recent decades. But this album specifically, in general, I hold this in the same regard that I hold, classics like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway or The Wall by Pink Floyd, or any of those big, grand, over-the-top concept albums of the classic 70s period. I think this stands up to all of that, and there's really not that many albums that are, in my opinion, up to that caliber. There's a lot of great bands that came about in the 80s and 90s, but this really is something special. So similarly to their first album, De Laus in the Comatorium, Francis the Mute is a concept album, but again, similarly to the first album, you could use that word fairly lightly. I don't think there's necessarily a specific plot line or there's a very specific story being told. There might be. If there is, it's very well coded because the lyrics are very much more imagery based. It's not their literal meaning. It's the images that they conjure up in your head. And in combination with the music, it is quite a stunning movie for your ears indeed. I think that's kind of the whole philosophy of the Mars Volta. Is to make films for your ears. That's what their albums are, to me, anyways. So the lineup has changed a little bit. Again, with the Mars Volta, the Mars Volta is considered Cedric Bixler-Zavala on vocals, writes the vocal melodies and the lyrics, and Omar Rodriguez-Lopez, who is the guitar player and music master. He controls the band. The band is then considered the Mars Volta group, and they retained a couple of members from the first album. Still got John Theodore on the drums, of course, the great John Theodore, my favorite Volta drummer. We've got Juan Alderete de la Pina, terrible pronunciation, forgive me. He is the bass player. He was a long-standing member after this. Of course, Isaiah Ike Owens, who long-standing keyboard player. He was there from the first album. And Marcel Rodriguez-Lopez, Omar's brother, is on board as percussionist. There's also a wide variety of studio musicians. Flea is on this album again, but he plays trumpet, which is very interesting. So, as for the music on the album, it's if you thought the first album was fantastic, and it is fantastic, they basically just take all of the ingredients of the last album and amplify it to an absolutely outrageous degree. The album is longer, the songs are longer, and everything is just more. Everything is more, and that's that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a great thing because I like to see a band pushing themselves and pushing their creativity, pushing their ideas to the absolute limits, and I guess that kind of again embodies that whole progressive rock spirit thing, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it is an incredibly long album. It's 70 minutes long, and there's only 5 songs on it, so that's kind of insane. A lot of people have problems with long albums, me in particular. I mean, I think certain albums don't warrant that kind of length, but I think what the Mars Volta did generally, the length of albums is okay for me. It's not the same with bands like Tool. I find Tool a little hard to get through, but I think there's a little bit more musical diversity. There's a vaster range of influences with the Mars Volta, which kind of helps. And I think back too, some of the albums I mentioned before, The Lamb Lies Down, that's a double record, that's a long album, The Wall is a long album. So I think of this as like a double LP, but just compressed to a single CD. Let's try diving into the tracks of this behemoth album. Like I said, it's a concept album. I think the concept is based loosely on the writings of a diary that was found by Jeremy Michael Ward, who was their sound manipulator on the first album, who had sadly passed away between Deloused and Francis. But I think that's what the concept is about, this diary thing. They took entries of a diary and then based the lyrical things on that. But again, I think that's a bit of women whimsy. It's all about the visual imagery that the words conjure up. Anyway, back up. Let's talk about the tracks. So, it opens with Cygnus, Vismund, Cygnus. And I can say, without any question, this has got to be my favorite Mars Volta song. It is tremendous. It is an absolutely tremendous piece. Separated into 4 sections. I don't really think about the 4 sections though, because it does hold together really well as a long extended piece. It's about 12 minutes long. It has that great opening, that dramatic, rich acoustic guitar that opens the album. It's such a great theme, and of course Cedric comes in with his bizarre lyrics, and it all kind of winds its way up, and then boom, it launches into like steroid funk. What I would call it. I love that main guitar line that comes in. Just killer guitar line. And the frenzied drums, John Theodore, you could tell that Omar is certainly pushing these musicians to their absolute max. Everyone is playing to an absolute frenzy. I think moments of the song is where you can see some of the comparisons. I mean, people mention there's a Led Zeppelin quality. I think it's just the way that Cedric's voice soars over all the cacophony of music that's going on. There's certainly a lot more fast-paced and frantic than Led Zeppelin, but there's a certain vocal thing, the way that he navigates those melodies. Really cool stuff. As the song section kind of winds its way into the interlude, the middle section, you get that really proggy, really proggy, really crazy, and then it goes into that wonderful build-up riff where that Omar solos on, and then that stays as a nice vamp, and it builds over the course of a few minutes, and it's got some of my favorite Omar playing. I love that solo when the music settles down and it goes into that quiet bit, and as it builds up, his soloing on that section is just phenomenal. And then, as is typical of the album, the build-up just keeps going, and it goes kind of past the point where you would traditionally think that's where you should go back into the song. It goes into like a big drum frenzy, and it just, hair-raising stuff. And then, before you know it, back into the main song section, and it is a wonderful piece. I really like the end section too, Con Sappho, that bass line, boom, dum, 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 boom. Really killer stuff. Again, kind of like the last album, it blows your mind. Your mind is, by the time the first song is finished, your mind is already kind of melted. And that Con Sappho bass line, I swear there's got to be a reference to The Sailor's Tale by King Crimson. That middle section of Sailor's Tale, it's at a different time signature, but they're playing around with the same notes for sure. Anyway, the great Con Sappho bass line eventually dissolves into some electronica stuff, more of that sound manipulation. It's kind of hinted at on the first album, but it's expanded upon on this album, as is everything else. And that's a really cool little interlude, the electronic-y bit. Winds its way into The Widow, which, if I'm not mistaken, it might be the Mars Volta's most successful single. This is kind of the pop song of the album, but as with, at least early Mars Volta, it's still big, and it's, bludgeoning, and it's heavy, and it's super dramatic. But really solid pop song. Again, I've always talked about how melodic Cedric is. And the melody in The Widow is utterly fantastic. Very rich. And of course the song's 5 minutes long. The song itself is only about 3 minutes long, and then the last couple of minutes are just kind of avant-garde kind of crazy sounds, which again, it helps with the flow of the album. It's just nonsense and crazy sounds, but I mean, it's a changing scene. I said, like, Mars Volta always works in scenes. The images that the music and the words conjure up, play out like a movie. So that's really cool, even the noisy bit at the end. That winds its way into El Vieques, which is a phenomenal track. Again, we really hear that strong Latin influence. Lots of Spanish singing. He sings Spanish in Cygnus. He sings Spanish in that as well. Tongue-tied here. But El Vieques it's really got that Latin flavor, and really it pushes it to the max. I mean, I'm reminded of Santana in some places, and it's got a great juxtaposition to like the real frenzied heavy bits, doom doom doo doo, and how that winds into the kind of more menacing quiet bit with that thumping bass line, boom 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 boom. Great stuff. It's funny. The song's 9 minutes long. It really doesn't feel that long. But it's just so engaging. You know, you kind of lose track of time when you're listening to it. Great richness in instrumentation. Some of the piano playing on this song is very classy. It sounds great. We get a great bit of vocal manipulation towards the end as well, when Cedric kind of does the final bit of stanza. The final bit of vocals there, and of course his voice is totally manipulated and turned into, it sounds like underwater. There's more of that to come, particularly on Bedlam and Goliath. You get a lot of the vocal effects, which is, some people might like it, some people might not, but I think, again, it's the story of the album, it's the visuals, it's that the feeling that you get, the images that get into your mind when you hear that weird stuff. So that's kind of a cool closer to that song, and then we get Miranda, That Ghost Just Isn't Holy Anymore. I think this is kind of the underrated track of the album. Maybe not, it's hard to say. But it's very good, very jazzy. This is where we get Flea on the trumpet. But it's the start of it, after El Vieques, we get this long stretch of birdsong, which is very atmospheric, and again, it feels like you're led to a false sense of security, like there's going to be another bludgeoning explosion of craziness, but it stays quite tranquil and mellow throughout the entire thing. Again, beautiful melody, that whole "and when Miranda sang, everybody turned away." It's a beautiful melody. Again, he's got that pop sensibility, and that's kind of an understated thing with the Volta, particularly in these early stages. But great track, very atmospheric. A very slow, long, winding build. Maybe it's got that Miles Davis thing, I don't know. But it's really cool. And then after the song ends, we kind of go into some more effects and electronic kind of stuff. And then we get a reprise of the Con Sappho bass line from Cygnus, Vismund, Cygnus, which is fantastic. And it adds to the continuity and brings the whole thing back together, which is really cool. And then suddenly, without warning, here comes the big explosion. The opening of Cassandra Gemini, which is really the epic to end all epics, in the great tradition of prog bands of the 70s, who would at least have one go with the sidelong epic, 20-minute epic. The Mars Volta unleashes to the world their own interpretation, which is a 30-minute epic, and it is utterly fantastic, but it can be a bit tiring to listen to because it is 30 minutes long. It is a commitment to listen to it, and especially considering that because it's 30 minutes long, you're really only halfway through the album when Cassandra Gemini starts. So that's the whole second side of the album, as it were. And when compared to some of the other classic side-long suites, I compared to like A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers by Van der Graaf, or Close to the Edge or Supper's Ready. I mean, it may not. It's probably got more faults than those tracks, largely to do with the length and maybe the production value, but it is quite something. Again, it follows that whole thing I was saying, is everything is bigger and more amplified and and grander. So when they do the big epic, they just take it to the absolute maximum, well beyond the lines of reason. But I love it. I love that exploratory nature of what they're doing. And Volta's also known for that kind of epic, grand sound, and it's all over the album. And Cygnus, Vismund, Cygnus has got that epicness comes right off the start of the album. But Cassandra Gemini, it is just it starts out quite epic, and then it just keeps going and going and going. There's so many great parts to it. like once that kind of main theme gets going, you know, it's just relentless. And then, you know, the big head bashing part. You know, they take a theme and they just get every single last bit of juice they can out of it. Which I said before, can be exhausting on the ears if you're not, you know, committed to listening to it. But if you are in that mood and you're committed to it, it's just absolutely mind blowing. So the other parts that are really cool, like the whole, you know, 25 wives in the lake tonight, very disturbing and, you know, freaky, and that goes into the big horn section. Bum 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 bum. And again, the epicness level is already at, like, you know, well beyond 11, and that's only halfway through. They're about 15 minutes into Cassandra Gemini when that part happens. It's insane. And then it's got, you know, the kind of quieter jazzy bits and the long build up with that kind of disturbing bass line. And of course, it all winds its way back into the main song, which is, again, after all that's been through the 30 minutes previous, is beyond epic as it ought to be. Finally winds its way right back into the sarcophagi intro, which is the beginning of Cygnus, Vismund, Cygnus, and that wraps the album up. We finally hear the conclusion of that little acoustic piece. And there you have it. Again, similar to the first album, you were left totally mind blown, and you know what has happened to me. Again, it's funny. The album's 70 minutes long. It still doesn't feel quite that long to me. And I mentioned before the production. You know, the loudness war, as I mentioned on the last couple of videos, have, you know, there is an unfortunate side effect to that. But it doesn't affect Francis the Mute quite so bad. I think there's more quiet bits on this record that kind of balance it out. Your ears do kind of get a break. You know, they get a short break at certain moments on the album. But yeah, all in all, this is absolutely essential. Like I said, it's probably the only album released after, I don't know, 1980 that I hold in the same regard as, you know, some of the other great prog concept albums. Not to say there aren't, you know, Dream Theater had Scenes from a Memory, that was a really good one, you know, Tool had Lateralis, and 10,000 Days, Radiohead with what they were doing. But this is just, it's on another level for me. It might have been just, you know, when I was growing up, and when I first got into the Mars Volta, I was about 14, 15 years old, and this had just come out, so I mean, I grew up with the band as well, so that might have something to do with my bias, but that's okay. I'm allowed to be a little bit biased. It's a free YouTube channel. So yeah, I think that about covers it for Francis the Mute by the Mars Volta, their second album released in 2005, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, their magnum opus. Certainly their crowning achievement. All in all, there's still lots of great things to come, but I think this is their ultimate moment. They would never do anything quite like this again. They never sought out to do the ultimate, you know, prog concept album or whatever again. They did do concept albums, but it was never to this overblown, over-the-top scale. Which is all good and interesting. So anyway, I'll stop blabbering on, finally, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like and all the rest of that stuff, and stay tuned for more conversations on the Mars Volta. We'll be talking about amputecture next. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much.